So I have to tell you, since the acquisition, actually this is it's 12 months exactly this week since we closed our deal with eBay. So a little more celebration for entrepreneurship in Timonium, Maryland this week. But since we got acquired by eBay and PayPal, been spending a lot of time out there, but I have to tell you, it was really nice to come to the airport and not board a plane. So it was, I actually pulled in. I didn't know how to get here. I actually went to the airport, through the parking garage area, came out and came over to the hotel, and I was shaking my head, thinking to myself, oh my God, this is just like a Pavlov's dog. I just didn't drive get on another plane. Anyway, so thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure and privilege to be here. I've actually known Vivian for a little while when there were some other entrepreneur events going on in Baltimore, and I always shudder at the thought of being considered an entrepreneur. A little juxtaposed position, 20 years and entrepreneur, 20 years in banking, but I guess what I did want to do today is sort of bridge some of the discussions of the week, entrepreneur, as well as what the panel usually is, which is around technology. And so the subject really here is around the intersection or the chicken egg event of what leads innovation, what leads business results, whether it's business strategy or technology innovation. So it's a subject that I've been intrigued about for years, and there's a constant debate, around it, particularly East Coast versus West Coast, frankly. It's dramatic on whether technology innovation drives business results or it's the other way around. I guess there's probably no real right or wrong answer. I do know that I have mine, and mine is, as you heard, is a little bit bound on in experiences like probably most other folks. So I'll begin with a couple of things that's pretty obvious before we start, because my experiences obviously form my point of view around business strategy and technology. So first, even though, again, part of eBay, it's pretty clear I'm not a 30-year-old tech geek, so there's no illusions there. You could also plainly hear I'm probably also not from the West Coast. In fact, my guess is you would know I'm not from the Mid-Atlantic. I wear my New York linguistics badge from Brooklyn pretty purposefully, actually. The company wasn't a social network company, which is obviously the buzz out in the space. In fact, I'm still not sure what one is. I'm just sure it's my boys' ways of finding dates. And so, despite having spent time with folks from Twitter and Facebook and MySpace, I still don't really, frankly, get it all. But anyway, and even as considered an entrepreneur, I really have a hard time with that, given the description of being a 20-year banker prior to getting out on my own. And so I have to say I'm always privileged to be talking about it, but I go home at night after the conversations and wonder whether I just lied in front of folks. So let me tell you, so I was a banker. I spent a lot of years at companies like Citibank, at Chase. I had done pretty well there. I had met with some professional success at those companies. Ultimately, I ended up being fairly influential. I ended up running Chase's credit card division. I had 16,000 people in my last stint. And invented a lot of different methodologies that were used in credit cards and bank cards. But I ended up leaving the business, oddly enough, because I really felt paralyzed in my ability to drive change, which is odd when you have a $3 billion marketing budget and that many people and things. And so when I left the business, or the industry, I guess, I decided I wanted to compete against it. And competing against it had a little intrigue because it was my best friends were in it. Actually, my twin brother is one of my biggest competitors. But it was really driven because I'm a big agent of change. And I'm an agent of change largely because of what I see as the opportunities that abound out in the marketplace. And so the company I created, Bill Me Later, which is in that haven for technology in Maryland, in a place called Timonium, did pretty well. And as mentioned, we were a pretty fast-growing concern in America, and one of the few actually alternative payment companies left that were developed in the last 10 years. And our acquisition, last year by PayPal was sort of the end of one journey and the beginning of another. And so with that as a backdrop, I do have a pretty strong point of view on whether or not technology innovations create opportunities for business strategies, or whether or not it's strategies that drive technology innovations. What's interesting, particularly if you go to the West Coast a lot, is my answer to that question hasn't changed probably in a decade, partly because there's no one on the West Coast who has worked for a decade that would have that. But it hasn't changed in a decade, despite the rapid accelerations and innovations that have occurred in technology. And I think it's because for me, and this is an East Coast mantra, is the real question is really whether a sustainable business strategy leads technology innovation, or whether or not innovations in technology, a single innovation technology, drives sustainable business strategies. On the West Coast and at other times when I talk at places, and I've done some at other entrepreneur programs, Texas, some place in Boston, and out at the institution you mentioned, there's a decided bent around not including the word sustainable long-term sort of business strategy. And for me, being a bit of a builder, I think my answer is the same, because I think of it as something that is not an event, an M&A event, or a business model that can be acquired and then ended. So for me, that's really the question. Now, the interesting thing about that is in today's business climate, probably neither question is relevant because of the nature of the environment, and that's probably the biggest challenge I see from entrepreneurs and talking to VCs out in the marketplace. Environment today where there's such extraordinary focus on efficiency, discernible, clear paths of high ROIs, a tightening but still very unpredictable regulatory environment, and very, very tempered and critical consumers and business postures out in the marketplace. It's really hard to even know which is the right answer, or whether or not one's answers are technology or business strategy or even executable today. There's such massive amount of capital that's accessible, but it's at such egregious cost, frankly, that it's hard, I think, for any real entrepreneur to know whether or not to lay their footwork down on a strategy, or whether on a technology itself. And so the answer today for a lot of folks is much narrower than it's probably been in many years. However, from where I stand and my experiences as a practitioner, and I tend to be much more, as you can tell, nearsighted than most, the answer is really that sustainable business strategies drive technology innovations, but that in today's environment, short-term technologies can create footholds in businesses. I actually think that the climate today is the perfect landscape for both to occur, where business strategies and technology can disrupt, frankly, paralyze business leaders, market leaders, and where they can create footholds for growth that, frankly, previously might not have been available. I'm a big, big believer in investing and moving more aggressively when others around you are weaker, or when their time and attention is being distracted with other events, particularly when they do things like self-defeating cost reductions, which seems to be I think, a big effort, from what I can tell, from most industries, in the States today. And so this type of market and the competitive framework is exactly the one that I love. And despite the fact that it creates fear for a lot of folks, it's exactly the right time for folks to get, from my point of view, aggressive. It is the ecosystem a bit that existed when Bill Me Later was formed, nearly, I guess it's 8 years ago, and why we sought such an ambitious strategy as to disrupt credit cards as a way to buy online. And so for me, the goal and the path was fairly ambitious, partly because I felt I was losing my youth, and it had to be ambitious, but I knew that the strategy had to have long legs, and I knew that it had to require some mantras of strength, and those really related to the type of platform that I wanted to build that fit the strategy. And so I knew that the strategy was strong, but I also knew that in order for me to build the company I wanted, the technology had to solve all the issues that I believed that were going to exist for decades and decades. And so the way that we sought out this path as a way to disrupt a $3 trillion marketplace was we had 4 or 5 mantras of success that we put out in the business, and we drove our business around those and all the technology activities around those mantras of efforts. And those 4 or 5 things were basically this. One is we wanted a platform. I wanted to make sure that I got the right technologists who could build a platform that for rapid and articulate product development and deployment. And so for most folks, and you don't know this, in financial services industries and most industries, products tend to be silos. Product technologies are silos. They don't interact. They're not end-to-end. They don't reference end users. And so they're fairly inefficient. They don't provide ubiquity. And having run, one of my jobs at some point was the chief credit officer for Citibank's credit cards divisions around the world, and then later their consumer bank around the world. It was most frustrating things to think about how to lend to somebody in one system and then not have any information about whether or not they're a relationship customer or at a time when mortgages were being had, that the mortgage environment never ever spoke to the other environments. And so we wanted ubiquity in our technology, given the fact that consumers are consumers and not be bound by technology or architecture that wasn't well distributed. We also knew that product functionality was going to change at a time as innovations changed, and it needed to be able to be a system whose code was open enough that it could accept product innovation quickly, particularly as markets move. The second, the basis of our business was all around information and data, and despite the fact I have no real academic degree in any applied math and things, I ended up making my reputation really on my ability to use data, and that was both as Chief Marketing Officer, which was for Chase, and Chief Credit Officer, which is also for Chase. A bit of a psych, as you could imagine my day. It's the only person in the U.S. actually to ever hold a job in a big in a bank. It was a lot of fun, but it was all because I knew the power of data. And our business mantra was really around building a technology that could merge and purge and sort through massive amounts of data in a form, in a way, faster and more unique than any other process in the United States. And in data that is transactional, meaning that it was extraordinarily rich. It's not implied data, it's not click-through data, it's not what you screen by and look, it's actual very, very deep data. And the basis of our business was really, we required it. It was to go and build a business model where I would be able to lend, give a way for a person to buy at a merchant's site, on their site, and give them credit, trust them, to pay for that item only using the data that the merchant got from the consumer while they were in the buying process. And so it was breaking out of the shell of an application. It was being built as part of a merchant buying experience as opposed to a offline sort of application experience. It wasn't a pre-registration. It was done in the nanoseconds of that engineered experience that retailers spend so much time on. And the mantra was, well, how do you get data in there to give somebody credit who deserves credit, an ability to buy without taking their credit card out, and do it and authenticate them without them doing anything other than providing their name and address, and ensure that there's no fraud. And so it was an ambitious goal, particularly for someone who built many of the data warehouses in the United States and credit bureaus and list processors. It was ambitious, but we knew it sort of could get done, and we sought people who could create the technologies on how to do that. Another mantra for us was it needed to scale across all distribution points. Difference of opinion I have with my new owners, PayPal, is they're very focused on e-commerce. Ours was a little bit different. Ours was we felt that our distribution points were all retail outlets, whether it was the phone, web, or physical point of sale, that our technology needed to scale in a way that our end users, clients, retailers, sell, and that, frankly, the $3.5 trillion market of electronic commerce, which, if it were to grow, 1% a year, is pretty sizable, despite the fact that our entry point was a $250 billion e-commerce marketplace. But the technology infrastructure for the product that we created actually scales across all those distribution points, but it was a mantra for us as our success, partly because of its size and relevancy to consumers, partly because of the relevancy to the people we were selling to, merchants, and partly because, frankly, it's a bigger market and as a valuation for comps, for business valuations, as you go and seek funding and capital, provided a much larger baseline for us. The fourth thing was the technology needed to be able to refresh the user experience constantly and easily. In fact, it needed to be able to deploy a solution to merchants so that they can engineer user experiences to their consumers. And so in many, many technologies out there today, the user experience is sort of like hard-coded. If you go, it's extraordinarily frustrating. The ability for a lot of folks, even on the web, to morph user experiences from one environment to another is very, very challenged. And that aggravates me. And so in the technology that we sought to build, we wanted an ability for the user to define the right user experience, or if you will, those who know their client base best, to define it as a function of their business model, understanding that we were a service provider, not necessarily an end owner. And the lastly, most intriguing part of all this was that whatever we built had to be done in real time, all the time, in any environment, which is to say there could be no latency in anything we did around the merging and purgings of billions of bytes of data in such a way that it would cause latency. Our goal was to beat the time it takes for an authorization of a swipe of a credit card for that credit to deploy to a person who's already got the instrument in their hand, that our product should go and interrogate somebody, identify them, authenticate them, assess whether or not they're good for credit, assess whether or not the merchant wants them to go buy, do that faster than the 3 seconds that it takes for that swipe to go through to your bank and come back and say you got the credit line to go buy. And interestingly enough, we did that, and it operates in about 1.7 seconds. What was interesting is the credit card model or payments model was never articulated in this way, and so the technology to do it really didn't exist. And that's where technology became so empowering. 20 years of experience and a lot of scars and a bunch of failures gave a good foundation for some of the mantras, but it was a technology that sort of released and empowered the capabilities for us to do something that frankly led to the acquisition of us by PayPal and eBay. The problem is that it always takes time, it always takes resources, it always takes money, and what we were trying to build was really a platform for sustained growth. And it takes an awful lot of conviction, particularly in a marketplace, or as any entrepreneur will know, is failure is almost certain. And so if you look back at from 2001 when I started the company, there were 50 or so plus alternative payment company models out there, and only 2 of them have survived. There's another one that may very well survive, and that's PayPal and Bill Me Later, despite the fact that it's a $3 trillion market, and so you can imagine the enormous value that can be created in that type of an industry. For the path to get there was sort of interesting and unique because it takes that time and money, resources and energy, and because it takes a lot of faith and conviction. It requires that you have to partner with a lot of folks and a lot of constituents, and it's in that way that you probably have the most interesting of experiences, and it's less about technology and less about business strategy for an entrepreneur to succeed. We were fortunate enough in that many of my prior business partners became investors, people who I helped grow. But what was interesting the first time I went out and sought money from an outside investor and venture capitalist and equity. And it's probably where I spent 70% of my time, despite the fact my passion had nothing ever to do with acquiring money. And so for us, we were fairly lucky. We acquired a smart board, a good cadre of investors, actually many of whom are in Baltimore. Two of our last 3 investors were T. Rowe Price and Legg Mason here. And together at Amazon were our last 3. But we had a pretty smart board, but they are extraordinarily and can be extraordinarily challenging and difficult to manage. In fact, maybe the most challenging of things to do. And for us, like in today's environments, the path to moving your technology and business model forward requires a lot of compromise, a ton of compromise. What's interesting is when you work with boards, there's always different opinions on degrees of compromise, and it's all formed from people's experiences. And so, honestly, for the last 4 years of Bill Me Later's life, our success and failure really related to my ability to manage our boards and the degree of and the agreement of where compromises should be had. For many, there is this path of narrowing your business strategy as a way to be successful, just like retain focus in a very small place on a small spot and win there. For others, it didn't really matter. It's just be small. It's just reduce your technology investments, whether it relates to the business strategy or not. Just reduce it, make it small, get focused, and live to fight another day. And honestly, I didn't agree with either of them. And although there's mixes of what they said that were very relevant and that we executed against, for me, my biggest point, my biggest path was put a few seeds that were well thought out seeds into the market, and don't back away from them. When others are getting weak, move forward more and more. Just have a fast and responsive system that allows you to morph and version your business and your products fast enough in a way that you can exploit the success of one. Success is not timed. It's not a stopwatch, and sometimes it takes a little bit more time for one area to nest than in others. And we had 4 or 5 seeds out in the market, knowing that we were sort of at a time when there was risk, developing a portfolio effect of risk management. You can hear a bit of the credit risk geek in me coming out there, but it was creating coping strategies for success of one to fuel the growth of another, as opposed to a sort of binary success or failure, black or white point of view of going one direction and abandon another. And so for me, what I find for most entrepreneurs as I speak at different places and when I speak to those entrepreneurs is few have coping strategies. They're mindlessly going in a direction that frankly is binary. And so for me, my sense and my advice to most entrepreneurs is always think ahead. Think about where your failings are going to be, even the best of times, because they will not survive. It'll always turn. The markets change, and it often goes to the worst of times. And you have to be elastic about creating coping strategies. And for Bill Me Later, because we kept our breath in our approach to a wider market, to ubiquity across systems and types of consumers and merchants and distribution channels, we were able to survive. Because we were able to nurture success in one of those seeds, and it funded the growth for others. And so I largely ignored most of the advice of most of my investors and board members, but it was a full-time job. And it was really because the operating mantras that we put out there, those portfolio of things I laid out earlier, actually for us was the foundation of our success. And so it turns out that we did well, and that the decision to keep building our platform was our best and most successful approach. And so consider this as I go through, think about some of the painful days of the last 8 years. We did our business case in 2001 and got our first funding 1 month after 9/11, when the capital markets were basically completely seized up. It was, besides the frightening times because of 9/11, you can't imagine the courage it takes for an investor to go give you money, and it was about $16 million, I think, at that time. $16 million at a time when they really didn't know where was going to happen with life. Our first client was LOL, just a little ways down the road here, and we kept that client for only 5 months before we ended our relationship to them, and we had no second client. And yet we were able to survive through that and manage through that because we, frankly, were able to show some of the power associated with this emerging technology and business model. Despite my best friends being in the financial service sector and having run a couple of the organizations there, as well as siblings, they sought to legislate us out by their relationships with the markets we wanted to play in, with retailers. Contractually legislate us out as deals would get done, but you were not allowed to board a competing product called Bill Me Later. And we were literally legislated out by, or attempted to be legislated out by guys who are massive brands. I mean, Citibank owns 17% of the market, Chase owns another 18% of the market, 35% of the market, GE, my sibling there, is the largest financial service provider to retailers in the United States. Our largest competitor after we started to get too much traction, our largest competitor spent 3 times more money than we had acquired through our rounds to copy us, and they spent it in 1/5 the time period that we had in building our business in an attempt to completely wipe us out of the market. That competitor was PayPal. And at the time we had raised $100 million, and they spent $300 million, partnered with a big financial institution, all to try to develop a technology that would completely wipe us out of the market and take our really undefendable, ultimately, IP and bring it into their business. And if that wasn't more bizarre, the fact that we got acquired 1 year ago was also pretty remarkable. So think about it. We're a company that grants credit, and we were acquired for the largest price of any company, privately held company last year in the United States, $1 billion, at a time when we were in the middle of, and still really frankly are, in the middle of the largest credit crisis in the history of the United States, and maybe of the world. And the courage by many, or the fact that we were able to close that deal, only implied that we had something worthwhile to go push that through to had a bunch of investors who, frankly, on eBay and PayPal had no idea what the hell, why PayPal would invest in a company that would grant credit. So it was extraordinary courage by the CEO of eBay and PayPal to drive something forward. And that list, that path of things we had to overcome is nothing different than what any other successful entrepreneur sees. And frankly, any private company that ends up surviving and being acquired or becoming public has even more stories that are more frightening than the ones that I sort of told. And so the lifelines that we had out there all those years, they allowed us to sort of skirt down this and skirt past death's doors, despite the fact that it was such an ambitious strategy. But frankly, the strategy was ambitious, but it was thankfully empowered by great technologists. And together it gave us the opportunity to cope with a changing market and survive. And so flexibility, rapid deployment, rapid redeployment, rapid versioning, scalability, all those benefits came to us, frankly, from great technology innovations that were not of the Java type of innovation, but re-engineering business models in a different way that yielded different types of outcomes and results than anyone else had done. APIs, creating SOA levels as technology foundations for our schemes and things like that. It was because of all those things that others behind us could not do that we were able to frankly be real successful. And it's paying forward even more now in PayPal, where our technology is frankly being embedded in an extraordinary technology platform, but one that has a lot of legacy issues associated with it. It is not ubiquitous. It is not fast versioning. It does not allow for easy morphing of user experience. It doesn't bring in the massive amounts of data that ours does. And so it's paying itself forward, frankly, because now all the folks in Timonium, Maryland largely now manage North America PayPal, and are bringing in those mantras into the North American business unit, because we know that those technologies can version it out into the marketplace faster than the 7 years it took for us to do so. And so we're really excited to be part of eBay, and really privileged that at the opportunities to keep innovating, to keep changing, to keep doing new things. Folks often ask me, so why are you still working? You know, and I give them usually two answers. My wife keeps telling me to get out of the house, and so she clearly put her mark and stamp on that. And the second is because I love to build things. I love to change. I love to disrupt. And from my siblings' point of view, it's a continuation of a long-standing competitive rivalry. So thank you for your time today, and I appreciate being here. And if you have any questions, but if not, it's a real privilege. So thank you. Yes, sir.
You touched on at one point in your talk about being unable to protect your intellectual property in this whole process. And I suppose your strategy was, if you're nimble enough, that's really not an issue. Was that your strategy?
Yeah, I guess if I were my legal counsel, they would say that our IP was foolproof and soundproof. The only times when we had that discussion, my usual response was, yeah, but I'd be unemployed, and so it would be an academic win. And so the realities are that for me to deliver jobs to people, and to ensure their comfort and security around that, the way I thought about it, it wasn't around protecting my IP per se, it was always around outdistancing myself. And so being nimble, reinventing, changing, and improving. And so for me, that was always the most defendable of paths. I've been sued a good number of times for a number of different things, and so I know the time it takes for them, and so I never really wanted to test our ability to defend our IP, although we have actually done it 3 times in the last 9 years. So, yes, sir.
First of all, I really enjoyed your story, and it makes me want to ask you this question. I'm sure you had a lot of these, but what would you say was probably your biggest aha moment in this entire adventure?
So I'm thinking about giving you like a well-articulated, thoughtful presidential response, and I'll get to it. My first aha was when I had to go ask somebody for money who had no idea what the hell I was talking about, and I was thinking to myself, why would this person actually give me any money when they have no idea what the hell it is I'm talking about? As it turned out, most of the people I talked about to try to get money from had no idea. And frankly, I think a few that I got money from had no idea what the hell I was talking about. So that was a big aha. The other aha, I guess, really was it was around courage and people. And so I always had this framework around people, that people, to feel successful, they just want to accomplish things. That it's less about how much they get paid, it's less about, whether they have a cube, it's less about how big their budget is, it's less about the size of their office, less about their goddamn title, which annoys the hell out of me. It's less about that people will congregate to you if you tell them you could get shit done and you can make things happen. And if you put out an ambitious enough strategy and they believed you, if they drank a little bit of the Kool-Aid, that you could acquire great people, and great people can fill any gap you have. And they get things done. And so the aha moment was, if you have enough passion and conviction and some money, some equity, frankly, that you can convince great people to join you on your journey, and they can get shit done. And accomplishing things is what it's really all about. It's the greatest fulfillment that I always had, and it's the greatest opportunity that I could, at any employer, frankly, could have two people. Never really had that ability to manage that at a big company, and it's still challenging now again in my new company. But it's less of an aha than it was as a complete revalidation of at least the type of people I want around me. Yes, young man.
I know all the products you deal with. With your product, do you ever feel that it's not adaptable to growing security risk out there?
You know, we actually have almost no fraud, despite the fact the way you get our product is you give a name and an address, a phone number, and what happens with that is you give it to the merchant, actually, because you're shipping something, you're buying something. You get that. We take that, and one of the technologies we developed is the ability to take that data and parse it in hundreds and hundreds of different forms so that it hit against all different types of databases, as opposed to asking databases to comply with our structure. It just goes out and hits, I don't know, 30, 40 different databases, credit bureaus, list databases, utility databases, merchant databases. And it does all that, you know, very quickly. When you bring in all that type of data, if you can actually find somebody, Gary Marino, oddly enough, there's two Gary Marinos in the little town I live in. I'm the much younger Gary Marino. So putting just that name and address creates a lot of fraud opportunities. Bringing in extraordinary amounts of data in real time allows us to triangulate, frankly, on who that person is. It's, you know, what's the computer you're buying from? Where are you? What's the merchant? What are the items you're looking at? What's the IP address? Have you ever bought at that place before? We ask people two questions. It's partly because of regulatory, which is their date of birth, and partly as a validation of who they are, which is the last four digits of their social security number, neither of which seems like it's compromisable and burdensome. But we bring all our data together, and the Gary Marino we find sits out there, and we go and say, might be two Gary Marinos, and it says, okay, give us the last four digits of your social and your date of birth, and with that, we're like, oh, that's the right Gary Marino. And because it happens in frankly, it's a series of cues. We get very little fraud. In fact, we have substantially less fraud than any other payment provider in the U.S., even those in credit cards, when people buy online. Our intention was to take security, the burden of security, away from consumers, and make it secure without them having to work hard on it or pre-register and disrupt the buying experience. So, but it's the fun part of it, right? Because people who commit fraud are really, really, really smart. And other than the fun part of carrying a gun and doing a raid, which I was able to do twice in my life, that was sort of fun. This is a lot of fun trying to outwit them, try to protect consumers without them knowing they're being protected in such a, frankly, anonymous way. So, yes, young lady.
You talked about at the beginning when you entered a market that had 50 competitors and was narrowed down to 2. How did you go out into particularly the financial community and convince them that you would be the survivor in the face of all of those others?
Well, first you have to have an ego to want to do it, right? And apparently I have that. So I had a benefit. I had 20 years of experience with, and at a senior position, so for most years people were sucking up to me. And so this was a chance for them to go, for them to get the, for me to pay back. So the doors were opened a lot. I think we felt we had a more, look, the way businesses succeed is that they have to have a value proposition that is pretty credible. And a way to, and for a venture capitalist or any equity provider, they have to believe that it's credible. And the best way to get that credibility is to have the people who would eventually be your clients talk about what the gaps were. And so the way we did that was we got people who were credible in that market to talk on our behalf in support of the build of the model. One of my chief credit officers actually left me in 1997 during a bit of a liquidity crisis for banks in the U.S. The rat bastard. Anyway, he left me and formed a company called Accept.com, which eventually got purchased by Amazon and turned into OneClick. And Mark Brito replaced a gentleman by the name of Ram Shriram, who was Amazon's head of business development, eventually became the first or second investor in Google, and led Amazon's acquisitions of many, many companies. But Amazon obviously was creating a foray into the industry and e-commerce. And Mark was, frankly, ran marketing, business development, and became an extraordinary value to us in the early days of representing what e-commerce merchants were going to deal with the existing form factors of credit cards. That plus the fact that our first investors were actually the biggest providers in the space, companies who do payment processors. First Data is a company that does that and things like that. That they were our first investors, once again, sort of formed the foundation, encouraged for others to come in and take a look. So we did not go out blind to a VC out of the box. We sort of staged the process of who to go to. I never really hit the streets hard to get money. It was always a fairly well thought out strategy, mostly because I'm lazy and didn't want to see a lot of folks, but it worked out pretty well. Yes, sir.
Do you have any plans for taking your existing technology and applying it to other markets?
Yes. And when I was at Citibank, I had one of my roles were in the Americas, so it was North America, South America, and Europe. And so there are markets around the world where one, effective, safe, sound, and reasonable lending is relevant, and that drives values to the merchants and sellers. Second is the technology, the information technology that could do a lot of things is becoming the foundation of a lot of personalization strategies within PayPal. Yes, sir.
Talk a little bit about the user experience. From my point of view, you have a great product, you have a defined market, and you maybe had a little bit with AOL. But you mentioned user experience.
So, yeah.
Refresh and how that plays into strategy is different.
So, you know, the concept sort of fits a little bit to sort of the, you know, recent trends in APIs, open software, developer platforms and things. But but the outcome of that is to be able to access as many potential marketplaces or universes for your product as you can without the burden being on you. And so, but that's similar to almost any part of an end-to-end experience. And so in buying, you have a retailer. Not all retailers are alike. Some are big brands, some are not big brands. Big brands like Saks and Neiman's have a very, very different point of view of where and when a payment bug should appear, and whether or not it should has the cachet name that fits their brand. Bill Me Later is not the cachet name brand that Saks really, was happy about. YA actually did like it, frankly, right? So, and then, given that the business model's intention was to allow retailers to promote or open up the funnel of the customers who they were seeking by giving them a tool, a marketing tool. You're going to buy flat screen TV. It's 90 days same as cash and buy if you spend $1,000 on a flat screen, or pay over 5 installments. That's a proven way for retailers to get people into the store. Best Buy does it on Sunday papers all the time, right? And so that experience is very different. You wouldn't ever see Saks doing it, and yet because so our technology needed to be able to move up and down where that user, where that merchant or that client is trying to hawk their goods. Same as if you're doing web advertising and you're at shopping.com versus, you're doing a bug flying around at Google. So the HTML layer, that first layer, has to be able to be morphed and changed and actually be given out to the guys who you're sucking up to, the client, and let them have the capability to do that. And at the same time not break any rules and regulatory things. And so that's very challenging. Can't break, there are certain rules around what we do. It's very precise, getting much more precise, and yet you want people to have complete version and capability wherever it is. Really challenging. And so, and it is the biggest challenge actually in PayPal around the world. The PayPal's user experience is very morphable, is very well engineered for English-speaking North American and European countries. It doesn't really have the same context in Asia and certain markets there, and so, and even where it places itself and how it boards itself, and so we're changing that, and those markets are growing very rapidly because we are, but you have to be very representative of both the end user, but also you're just a middleware provider here. You have to, and that's the hard part of most technologies, is they don't have this bus layer that, really hard to create, and it limits you. It limits you. You have to have the foresight, though, at times to not go until you have it. Sometimes you do go before you have it, and so. Others? All right, well, thanks very much for your time. Great questions.
Gary, thank you very much. Whoops, you can't leave yet. Oh, tchotchkes. We want to leave this with you so you remember the trip to the airport that you didn't have to get on a plane.
Thank you very much.
And actually, thanks for your talk, but also this very animated Q&A. We really appreciate having you here this morning.
Thanks very much.
Actually, I would like to thank all of you for attending this morning. It was a great turnout, a great audience. You get another chance. February 24 is our next Visionaries in IT meeting here, actually I believe at the same place, at the Westin, and we'll be listening to Hooman Radfar, who's the CEO and co-founder of ClearSpring Technologies. So again, thank you very much for your participation this morning.